Hi guys, I've cleaned this all up and I've actually rendered out the two extra layers that we made last time. So just as a quick recap, I've done this extrusion of the circle, scattered some points, done some ramps with the attribute transfer, and then I had this noise which I've been tweaking a bit. So I think that looks pretty cool. And it's the same as we had previously, but I did go back to the unified noise. And if you put down unified, you can see there's the normal one, and then there's one called unified noise static. So this one is completely bugged, but this one's working fine. So I don't know what the difference is between them. They look the same to me. But I use static and it's much quicker. But the same like theories apply whether you use your own a combination of noises like I used before, or just use this one. But it's basically the same. I have my rough Wally, which does the main shapes. Then I've got some extra roughness, and I use a warp to just kind of mess the noise up a little bit. And then I've got the ramps for the fall off and to clamp the values. So I basically just played around and experimented with that to get a nice full shape. And then all the usual stuff, adding color, the alpha, and I've kept this position noise, which is the one I have animated. And then I've scaled it up. So we know from frame 10 to frame 20, the portal appears. So what I've done is I've just scaled it on. It doesn't need to be fancy at all. We'll see what it looks like in the comp. And then still using the same attribute transfer for the closing animation. And then I've written that out. So you can see there how the attribute noise on the position is kind of giving us an interesting motion there. And I've taken the same, oh sorry, this attribute transfer is actually the one that forces the points to adhere to the circle. So like I'm doing with all the other layers, I've copied the same one, and it's basically just kind of confining the point cloud to the circle. Keeps it a bit neater and makes it fit a lot better with the rest of the effects, specifically the tunnel. So just to show you, I wanted it to fit a bit more exactly to that tunnel there. So we've got that, and then I've just duplicated the same setup here and made Portal D. And then similarly, I've written out the fewer points from particle A, and I'm just got an L there. And then in flakes, we've got the same thing. I've ended up removing a few more points, writing it out again, and then removing a few more. So I couldn't really decide on how many flakes I actually wanted. But I landed on that. This is all the same. And this is the same here as well. So you can just see quickly how these move. I think it works pretty well. We could have done a lot more sort of fancy things with custom sims, but for what we need it to do, I think it's fine. And then, as before, the noise on the shader. So I've added mantras for those. This should be D. And I've rendered them out. So let's jump into the comp. This is where we were before. And here's our two new layers. So this is what the new base layer looks like. So remember, this one is the completely unsimulated base. We're still just rendering points, but the movement's just coming from an attribute noise. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't need to feel super realistic or anything in terms of its motion, because we just want it to kind of fill in the gaps in the background. And then our flakes are there. So I think that's actually working quite nicely. So I'll just quickly try and update this comp and get those in. I'm not going to spend too much time trying to make this comp look like final, but we'll just get these extra layers in there, and then in the next video we'll start to basically wrap up this whole first shot, or the first effect. So we just need to do some dust, some debris on the ground, maybe some extra particles in the dust, and then we'll render out all those environment layers and all those secondary effects, and then jump back into this comp and kind of finish it all up. So for now, let me just temporarily sort of merge these in. So we have this base effect. I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing, which is knock this right back. And then see, in this one I used the background to get it flat. I could also just basically gamma up this one, so don't gain back up, so it's still kind of flat, maybe a bit more blue, and then use another one, branch off here, and really get some bright bits. So low gamma, high gain. I'll jump into the highlights tab, bring the saturation down. Oh, apparently there's no highlights. I'll knock it down over here. So just get something nice and bright and sharp, and I'll merge it back on here. Burn it in as usual. Let me save. So in this case, I'm just basically trying to convert my raw render into something that has a lot more information. So something like that. So you can see how it's gone from this and just knocking it back, there's not much going on, and then that looks much more complex. Really trying to maintain that fall off between what should be the brightest point, which is the ring, and then a nice fall off outward. So I'm just going to merge that behind everything else. Just burn all these on top. So I mean, this looks like a total mess. That's fine. I mean, we're doing so much to it over here, we're kind of bringing it all back together. So let's see if this is doing what we need it to do. So before I just had these layers. Now I'm merging in the background and it's not doing much. So here's where I can start to tweak how much of that, you can see it there. If you look around this section here and I disable that, so it was completely dark. So I want to kind of fill that up a little bit. So I think these highlights are a bit too strong. So I think that's pretty much transformed this. Just that simple SOP-based point cloud. We need to remove that. And just disable this again. It's made a big difference, I think. It's really filled in that space. It feels a lot more cohesive. Yeah, I think this is feeling pretty good. So a lot of finessing we can do later on, but as a base comp, it works. And then I'll just throw these embers over I'll just merge them in after all of this. So I have made a mistake with the embers here. You can see that the circle is actually higher up, and that's because I was using that bulge to sort of push the whole effect further into the room, but I forgot to put that on the embers. Should be fine. So in this case, again, I'm looking at the end result and then coming back and adjusting the colors. And I think I'll do the same thing where I have a base that's got a low gain, and then I'll gamma down to keep only our super bright ones and merge that on top. So if I disable that, you can see I'm basically trying to fill up as much space as I can with pieces that aren't too intense, and then I'm just saving very intense ones and merging them back on top. And overall, if we compare that to just the raw render, there's just a lot more going on. So I don't know why Mantra has decided to add 2 watermarks to this. So let's just have a look and see how this all looks together. And then I think we'll leave it at that for now and probably wait until we have all the environment layers before we kind of tweak this too much. I don't think it needs to change too much from where it is. It might just be sort of playing around with different saturations, different brightness levels. I always find there's an argument for both variations in terms of intensity. So I feel like it's very easy to always think that a magical effect should be super bright, and even I fall into that trap where, so looking at the result, I'll come back to one of these and say brighten the whole thing up. And I'm like, ooh, that feels a lot more powerful. But at the same time, there's some very convincing magical effects, just actually surprisingly low intensity. So if you do something like this, because there's quite a lot of dark stuff in there, but you can see there's nothing particularly intense here, but it has a nice sort of realistic feel to it. So I'm always fighting with myself between super high intensity and a more naturalistic brightness. So that's probably more up to personal preference, or maybe how it looks in the environment. But when I'm usually tweaking this, I'll try both. So I'll go for a super intense one, watch it a few times, go for a dark one, maybe write them both out and watch them both over and over again. So we'll try and decide that a bit later when we have the environment. But I just like looking at the end result and just changing some values and seeing what it does. I really like this darkness. Looks super cool. So maybe if we do that and brighten up this base layer. That's also super cool. So, I mean, I'm pretty happy with this. I think there's so much interesting results you can get just from this small comp and these layers we have, that it's kind of like we can take this effect wherever we want it to go, really. So with that, I'll go back to how this was, and I'll catch you in the next one where we'll add the secondary environment effects. See you then.